Hello, my name is Ellie Naveja. I am student teaching at Gomez Heritage Elementary School, which is in Omaha, Nebraska. The first part of my student teaching was in a fourth grade classroom where I taught in English, and the second part of my student teaching is in special ed, and it's with grades K through 4. And so just taking a look at my poster, I have my theme, Agents of Change and Reform, my guiding questions, my competency statement. I have something that's called Mi Testimonio, which I'll share in a little bit. I have my synthesis, reflection, and of course my artifacts. Okay, so just getting started with Mi Testimonio. What is that, right? It directly translates to my testimony, but it's more than just that. Mi Testimonio, like a testimonio, is the power of, testimonio is a genre that exposes brutality, disrupts silencing, and builds solidarity amongst women of color. And so I wanted to share my testimonio with you because I feel like going through UNL, I've learned things and wanted to share what I've gone through to be able to do that with my students. So before I begin with my theme or competency statement, it's important to start with my guiding questions because they kind of led me to understand how I'm going to shape this project. The first question is, how do systemic barriers impact CLD students throughout their K through 12 education and beyond? And so that question is very important. Also, how can testimonio bring about change? And so that led me to my theme, which is Agents of Change and Reform, and my competency statement is I am competent in communicating social justice initiatives that inform key community members about the educational inequalities that culturally and linguistically diverse students, or CLD students is how I will refer them to, as well as immigrant students face in school systems. And so let's just start with my TED Talk shoes. So I didn't actually do a TED Talk, but these shoes remind me of a time where it was my first semester. It was an English class. It was writing an argument, and my teacher gave us the assignment of giving a TED Talk to our class. But she said it has to be something you're really passionate about. And so I come from a community that's large immigrant populations. And so I wanted to focus my project on students whose parents are undocumented and the impact that has had on their pathways through school. And so I didn't know exactly how I was guiding along with everything, but in doing all of that, I realized that I had everything ready, and I had my whole presentation ready to go, and when I got to the place and was ready to present, I forgot absolutely everything. And of course, at the end of it, I decided to do something that I very much regret, which was I took off my shoes and I said, well, put yourselves in the shoes of these students. And I don't know why that made sense in my head, but I did it anyway. And so that it was definitely a learning moment, and that is why it's on my board. And so connecting that to my competency, I think that these shoes remind me of the passion that I had for wanting to advocate for these students. And so that is why this is the first artifact, starting with that passion. The second artifact is a program schedule for AERA. And in this, just to start the story from the beginning, I have a mentor. Her name is Amanda Morales. She's spectacular. I'm super inspired by her. Amanda, if you're watching this, you're spectacular. Anyway, Amanda has been my mentor, and she paired me with a ton of research projects. And with one of the research projects that I was working on with Dr. Elvira Abrica and her, it got accepted into AERA, which is a conference, a national conference, and it was in Toronto. And so I was super lucky to go and sit there with them and be around researchers and present and listen and learn from everybody. And so I think the key part of this artifact and what I've learned is knowledge. And so thinking about this artifact and my competency, I know that knowledge is very important in order to be able to not only to advocate. You obviously need to know what's going on and what statistics are the statistics. You also need to know just the testimonios that everyone has to share as well. So then moving on to my third artifact, the fuzzy ball. The fuzzy ball is from a camp that I did this summer. It's called the UNL Diversity Matters Camp. And so it's a camp for students who are in high school who are interested in being educators. And so I was super honored to be the director of the camp, and it was just such an impactful experience for me. And what I did was I made a week-long camp week full of experiences that centered around identity, around community, around privilege, and around perspective. And so in doing that, I made one of the activities that I found was the privilege walk, and I led it, and then afterwards we had this very powerful discussion. And in that discussion we used the fuzzy ball. So the rule of the fuzzy ball is you cannot speak unless you have the fuzzy ball. So I loved it because everyone was able to share their own perspectives and share things that I just felt like within just 2 days of knowing them and providing that, getting to know each other and having that community, I felt very honored to be listening and for them having to share those experiences. And so this fuzzy ball reminds me of vulnerability, and I think that's very important when thinking about change and reform for students, because vulnerability shows that, it just not only shows that you need to know yourself and your identity, but also the identity of the people around you and understanding them as well. And so now that we know these artifacts, I have found themes between each one. So the first one, I don't know if you've heard of them already, but the first one is passion. I'm obviously very, very passionate about helping these students. The second one is knowledge. I've learned a lot from the researchers and from my mentors, and I just feel very fortunate to grow so much in knowledge in order to help these students. And the third artifact, I grew in vulnerability. I learned that in my future classrooms and even in any situations that I would be in, it's important to be vulnerable to be able to learn more about the situation and the context around you. And so reflecting upon the experiences and my testimonio, I realized that I've had testimonio my whole time here at UNL. I've always been passionate about sharing a story that kind of disrupts that common knowledge that people have, so that way that there's more there's that perspective that isn't always told is shared. And so I think that was huge, and it helps me, the passion, the knowledge, and also having the vulnerability helps me understand that I am able to advocate for these students. And so something I know I can improve on is I have focused a lot on Latinx experiences. And so I want to be able to understand, to be able to understand systemic and the greater impact it has on all CLD students, I think I also need to broaden that and understand different cultures and different languages and the impacts that that in the education we have now has on them. And then also another limitation or another thing that I think I can improve on is being able to share more perspectives and being around other people. So being more involved in other things other than what I'm comfortable with. So a limitation that this theme may have is that you need access to be able to get some of these opportunities. So for example, AERA, if I didn't have a mentorship first off, then also the opportunities that came from that mentorship, if I didn't have any access to those, this opportunity would have not been a possibility. So knowing that there's access and opportunities that play a role is important. And also that you need a strong emotional support system, because sometimes advocating can be kind of emotionally, it could take an emotional toll sometimes, and so it's very important to have an emotional support system as well. So for the future, I am planning on, my short-term goals are to move to Sacramento. And in Sacramento, I hope to teach at either a dual language school or at a school that has a high immigrant population. And then also for long-term goals, I'm hoping to go to grad school. That's definitely my goal. And then furthering that, maybe either deciding to focus a lot of research in field experiences or go further and go into getting a PhD. I'm not sure. But those are just some of my goals. I hope to be able to use these competencies and apply them into my teaching when I get there, and show my passion, show my knowledge, show my vulnerability in my classroom, and share my testimonio with my students, and hopefully get them have like a safe environment for them to share that with me too. So now that I've shared my guiding questions and how my competency statement and my theme revolve around that, as well as my artifacts, my synthesis, reflection, and my entire testimonio, do you have any questions?